Jillian Marie Browning is an interdisciplinary artist and an assistant professor of photography at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. Their exhibition Rootwork is on view through January 4th, 2025 at the Albany Museum of Art. The Florida native explores themes of feminism, identity, and the contemporary Black experience in their art. Rootwork explores hair care practices and natural healing practices that have long histories in the South and also share that term. In this conversation with the artist, Sidney Pettice, AMA Curator of African Collections and African Diasporic Art, talks with Browning about their artwork and career.
All right. Well, during our exhibition season this fall, we've been talking a lot about process and what it's like for us to install exhibitions, deinstall, and all of these things that come with that. So, I'd love to hear you talk more about your art practice and your process.
So when I'm making things, like the majority of the work I make is on fabric because one, logistically, it's not heavy. And so when I have to install it somewhere, I'm not usually thinking about like, okay, we're gonna have to run a crane or we're gonna do something crazy with it. And so it can normally be like on the wall or even if it's hanging from the ceiling, it's like not super heavy. And so normally it's like I got either like some monofilament or some string or
Mm,
something or just some tacks and we can put it on the wall. And we do stuff like I think about that, but I do have to think about like size a lot because I do work
mm,
pretty large. And some spaces, someone will be like, who's maybe never seen the work, will be like, we want to show this, and I'll be like, well, how tall is your ceiling? Because this piece is 13 feet tall. And so people are like, oh, okay, well, we got to think about something else. Like, do you have
mm,
anything smaller? And so like when I'm thinking about like making work, sometimes like the size of it is very important and how big it is, and sometimes it's not super important. And so I'll think about like, do I want to stretch this and make this bigger than it needs to be, or should I keep it small? Or so I'm really kind of like thinking about like showing it a lot when I'm thinking about the size it's
mm,
going to be and how I'm making it and what it's going to be on, because the end goal is to exhibit it. So it's like, can this fit anywhere? So that's a big thing that I think about
right.
when I make my work. Um, but also I like to think about like the creativity of who's hanging it. And
Mm,
so I mean I do hang a lot of my work, but if I just give the work to a gallery or museum, I want to make it easy for them to hang it, but also I kind of want
mhm,
to sometimes give them some creativity with how it's hung. And so I'm not super exact about how it looks. Sometimes I'll be like, yeah, it can be hung in the round in the middle of a space, or it can just be on the wall. It can be tacked there, or it can have like little nails or something like that. And I kind of like let let it be a little flexible because I don't want things to be like super rigid or difficult to install. Because if I have to install them, then I got to deal with all that. I don't want to do
mhm.
that. So so I try to make it kind of easy. But yeah.
So, can you tell me more about the process of making these works? Like, how do you make them? I know you're in cyanotypes.
So I work a lot with like historic photographic processes and a lot
Mhm,
of cyanotype. And a cyanotype is a contact printing process. And
mhm,
so when I'm using like negatives or objects, I kind of go about it a teensy bit differently. But um, basically, you take two chemicals, potassium ferrocyanide, ferric ammonium citrate. They get mixed together, and then it makes a light sensitive like coating. And you can put that on anything that is e- easily anything that's porous. You can do it on non-porous things. I'm not an expert in that, but like fabric and paper and things like that are really easy. You coat that on there, and then once it dries, you just put whatever you want to print on top of it, and then
mm,
that makes whatever like and exposes it to UV light or to the sun,
mhm,
and whatever the light doesn't touch will be the same color as your substrate, so like white most of the time. And how that works with negatives, that you put a negative on top, and then it'll be an image underneath it. And so I work like that a lot, and I use large scale negatives because these are contact prints. So the size of the work is the size of the negative that I'm using. And so some
mm,
people will ask me like, are these projected? I go, nope. I print one very big negative. I buy basically literally just rolls of inkjet transparency sheets and like rolls of it, and then I print however big I need to. I have large format printers that I use, and then I lay that on top of the fabric or the paper, and then it gets exposed to the sun or to. I built a UV exposure unit which is just like eight black lights that I bought on Amazon screwed into the top of a shelf, and I just let that go, and that exposes it. So everything that I have that's really large lately, I've made with that exposure unit, and I can make things 4 feet by 9 feet on that thing. So I can make like that's my only constraint. So still pretty large, and I expose it to the light, and then you just rinse it in water, and then once it's washed, that's it. It's stuck to your paper or your fabric, and so it's super versatile, which is why I really really love that process. And so I can really easily take photographic work and put it very big, and that's why I like to use it. I also like to see the hand in my work, and I'm not a very precise cyanotype artist. You'll see people who make really beautiful, crisp, clean cyanotypes, and like I like to run with the weirdness of the chemistry. If the water was too cold that day and something happened, or in some of my work, sometimes like people use like distilled water to mix their chemistry. I'll use like whatever sink water is happening in my studio sometimes, and then you get weird mineral deposits, and I love that because it's texture and things are happening there. Creases in the fabric, I just leave that stuff there, and so I try to make it as legible as possible. But I also like to be able to see that there's like an artwork in here. It's not something that is, that's a machine didn't make it, like a human being made it. And so I like to kind of have those different shapes and creases and discoloring and all of that stuff in there. I think that's like the fun of working in like a historic photographic medium. Things are not going to be perfect. And so that's why I really sort of run with that. And like my imagery, I shoot either digital. Sometimes I shoot film and scan it in, but there is a nice mixture of like analog and digital practices in what I do. I like to use what I have available to me digitally. I print digitally on large negatives, and I use a digital camera, but then I use this historic process to then print them and have them be on like fabric and things. I love that juxtaposition of those two things, and to be able to talk to people about that as well.
And let's talk more about medium and your use of fabrics, and specifically cotton fabrics, and I believe cotton paper as well.
So all the materials that I use in my work is 100% on purpose. And so I use cotton fabrics and cotton papers and like wooden hoops and like actual raw cotton or cotton yarn and things like that in my work, because I use a lot of cotton to directly reference cotton as a slave crop in the South. All of my work is about my own personal experiences growing up as a Black femme person in the South, and how that relates to how I grew up, how I think about myself, like historic references of my family and things like that. And so I use that cotton to talk about that and to have that conversation, to bring that up. And then also when it comes to like women's tools, like women's craft, I grew up also being taught how to cook and sew and clean, and there are things that you do as a girl, like things that you have to learn how to do, and so I learned how to do those things too. But I love to reference that in my work, and using things like cotton yarn and wooden embroidery hoops, and like even like acts of like braiding and things like that, to reference those skills or those trades, and put them in like a, the white cube context, and not like, I think there isn't a difference between craft and art. I think those two things can be absolutely one and the same.
Right. And can you tell me more about this reflection of personal experience and why that's so important to you and your work?
For me specifically, I really wanted to talk about my own experiences, and like I know a lot of my experiences are absolute universal experiences of other Black people who grew up in a similar area as me. But for me, I'm doing things that are very personal to me, like that I want to talk about them, and I want those things to be shown, and to have conversations with them to people about them, and like, not all those things are sad things. A lot of those things are really fun things. When we talk about hair and beads, and like, sitting in between your mom's legs while she like braids your hair and you're crying because you're tender headed, and like all of that stuff. Like I love having those also like nice fun conversations, and like I just think that it brings people together. I think also brings some of like the fun, like less stuffiness to some art. I think some people take art really really seriously, and I think it doesn't always have to be so serious. It can be a fun thing. But I also really like to talk about things that are harder, because then it's like bringing up a conversation and being able to have those discussions in like an open space with people about it, but to also like have a lot of representation. Like I know people like to say like representation matters, but it truly really does. Like when I was going to school for art, I did not see a lot of other Black artists. Like my professors weren't showing me people that like, oh, you like to do this kind of thing, this person does this kind of thing. And so I was doing lots of independent research, or I would go to museums, and then I would see somebody who was like making art that looked like work that either I wanted to make or work that I was making, and being like, oh my god, okay, so like this does exist somewhere in the world. And so I like to also be able to do that, so somebody can walk in and be like, okay, so this does exist somewhere in the world. I can also exist somewhere in this institutional frame. Like
Mhm.
this isn't a frame that anybody can be in. It's not something that is exclusive for one particular kind of person.
Right, yeah. Well, can you tell me a little about this piece that we're sitting in front of?
So this piece is called From the Ground Up. And basically, like a couple months ago, last fall, I was walking through this patch of sugarcane that my dad has growing like in our yard, like in the land that I grew up on. So I'm from the country. So like I'm from the middle of Florida, which is very much the country. I grew up running around with no shoes on, just like doing stuff, being a little weird kid. And like I would say maybe like 15 years ago, my dad grew like this patch of sugarcane, like during one of his like I'm a gardener moments. And like he just never cut it down. It's still there. And then like every year, it's like it'll die and then it'll rot and it'll grow and then it's very dense. Like there's a bunch of other stuff growing around it. And so I was walking through it. It's not super big. It's maybe like 10 feet by 10 feet. I was
Mm,
walking through it and I was just like looking at like the sugarcane and I was like reflecting on like how it's growing and how it survived like completely untouched. And I was kind of like relating to like how the cane kind of looks like my hair at moments. And then I was thinking about like how my dad fostered like my art journey and who I was as a person. And like I was like, I'm so similar to this patch of sugarcane. Like my
mhm.
dad just sort of like let us grow and be something and he just trusted us to do that. And so like when I'm thinking about like who I am and who I am as an artist and like how I relate to things and how I relate to the area that I grew up in, I really was thinking about like this patch of cane. So I went and I was photographing like little bits of this cane. I was photographing it in the rain, I was photographing it at night, I was photographing during the day, I was walking through it trying not to get bit by a snake and like things like that. And I was like, just then I took like sections of my hair. And so, like, this corner over here is some of my locks. This is like the side of my head with my locks. Up there is my scalp. And it's
Mhm.
abstract a little. I want to do these kind of close up things, but I wanted to kind of mix them with these sort of more like landscapey, some sort of close up images of that sugarcane and to kind of relate them to each other. And then the sugarcane also too, it grew up on the land that I grew up on. I grew up on the same 4 acres of land my entire life. The sun that grew that sugarcane grew me. The hands that grew
Mm,
that sugarcane grew me. They're my father's hands. He planted all that by hand, just kind of let it happen. And I titled the piece From the Ground Up because I'm thinking about this the how that cane grew from the ground up, but then also how I myself was nurtured and grown from the ground up to become the person that I am today. And like I'm still growing and sometimes dying and rotting and coming back as a new person or a different being. And so is that sugarcane. I was there like 2 weeks ago taking pictures in it again, doing stuff. So like it's just kind of like doing its thing. And I don't know, it means a lot. I don't want him to ever hack it down. I don't think he's going to, but it's like it's a very I don't know, it's a very I don't know, so almost meditative place for me now.
yeah, yeah, and I think it's a really like beautiful take back of this history of sugarcane, and it makes a really beautiful story
Mhm.
out of, a very deep history. And to end, I wanted to ask you about your experience here at the AMA. Is there anything that surprised you about Albany?
Well, I had never been to Albany before I had come here for the very first time um, to install this show. And Albany, like, I don't know, it's very interesting because like so much I feel like of America looks exactly the same, and so many people are just like, I'm from this place, and that place can be literally anywhere. Albany looks like it could be Ocala, Florida. Albany looks like
Mm,
it can be anywhere that I've like driven like through to go somewhere, anywhere that I grew up. It's like it's very small, but like also kind of quiet, but also still has things. And like it's just like it seemed welcoming. It didn't seem like scary or new or different, and I really liked that. And I also really liked that like that would be the community of people that will be seeing my art here. Is that like it's not like a weird stuffy place. It seemed like a very regular like people who would want to come in and have a conversation and see something and relate to it. And I really really like that.
thank you so much
Hmm.
for talking with
Thank
me.
you.